The other thing about this is that it will tell which title of the US code on the right-hand side, where some of the larger programs actually come from. So for IMET, the International Military Education and Training comes from Title 22 of the US Code, but personnel exchanges would be through Title 10, right? And that just means they would actually come through a different budget allocation. One thing that some teams will do at the very beginning of the topic, they'll lose a few times, and then they will realize that you must write out the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in your plan text. Do not write NATO. And that is because not only does it link to like a critique of acronyms that lots of people have, but also I didn't do this search. I usually do this search, but there could be other organizations in the world that use the acronym NATO. This happens with the European Union. And actually, if you know Dustin Remy from Topeka High, coach at Topeka High, I actually coached him in a round where he said, I don't know what this, he ran a specification argument that said, I don't know what this EU is. I don't know what the U is. And then proceeded to list off about a dozen different international organizations whose acronym or shortened to EU. Right. And so a silly argument, right, that you don't want your teams to lose to, because there will be people that run it for sure. Right. The word "the" right before North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for all my fans of grammar, is a denotating article, meaning a specific organization itself. And so make sure that you're thinking about it in terms of who are the member states. Some people will try to say aspiring member states are a part of NATO. And I mean, a 5-second Google search will disprove this. There is also an issue with the word "in," and I'm going to kind of connect this with the next few words. Right, does "in" mean within one or more of the following areas, or does it mean throughout one or more of the following areas? There are tons of definitions for both, right? And so the difference here would be with the argument of subsets topicality, that you do one part of artificial intelligence, you don't affect the entirety of the category or the entirety of the area, right? Which would be a within versus a throughout distinction. So the real phrase, the real violation would be in one or more of the following areas, and then whatever that area is, right? So that has a lot of implications for the types of links that the negative can get and offense that they can generate. It's been a popular argument on the college topic every time we have an areas or a categories type of topic, and it's definitely started to filter down. Oh, this one I forgot to take off. All right, so before I get into the specific areas, are there any questions, anything you kind of want me to talk about or clarify a little bit? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the first one, let's talk about artificial intelligence. And all of you and I know what artificial intelligence is. Like, we'll just, for the sake of argument, we'll call ourselves common people, right? Except we're all kind of weird, probably. Artificial intelligence, we know that it deals with computer programs and some type of learning, but in the field, there are a lot of different distinctions that are made. But for the purposes of pure definitions, the ability of machines to perform tasks that are typically require human intelligence. Right, that's pretty broad. And so a lot of them will make a distinction in terms of what is it autonomous or not? Some people say artificial intelligence is only autonomous, meaning no human interaction after the initial program is made. And other definitions say that it has to, in order to be quote unquote artificial intelligence, it has to include machine learning. So an algorithm that learns, something like Alexa, any social media sites that your students will be using, things like TikTok, all use artificial intelligence algorithms in order to get people in contact with one another, right? These machine learnings, this is important for things like lethal autonomous weapons, which I'll talk about in a second. So they get better and better at finding the precise targets. So one of the biggest area of contestation, I think, for artificial intelligence is the degree of use or involvement of human beings. And so I mentioned autonomous, but there's also semi-autonomous, right? And so the biggest case that you'll find within these types of weapon systems, artificial intelligence affirmatives, are like the one in the novice packet, the laws affirmative, or I think initially it was supposed to be something about banning laws, but it ended up being the ethical artificial intelligence, if I'm correct. Yeah, which consequently is the exact same Michigan file that was turned out, minus a bunch of cards, FYI. But laws, lethal autonomous weapon systems. This is what we're talking about when they say killer robots. We're not talking about Terminators, right? They're talking about things like a system of guidance and targeting that you put onto a drone, and then you send it out on patrol. And by all of the different variables that we have programmed into it, then it will go and seek out targets. Or if it sees something, it can evaluate whether or not it is a target. And so it won't be that person that's maybe 1,000 miles away in what looks like a nice video game chair, right, with buttons or whatever, controlling the drone, right? It's not a human pushing the button anymore that kills the family of terrorists or the group of terrorists, right? Or the innocent collateral damage that kind of went along with that. It was the artificial intelligence that made that distinction, right? So when you think about the principles of accountability and transparency, that can kind of get you into the novice case of the ethical AI principles, which I'll go to in a second. So there's also a distinction between the human use distinction is between autonomous and semi-autonomous. Semi-autonomous would mean that on these drones, we might use the drones for navigation, or the artificial intelligence for navigation and targeting, but it is the human that ultimately is in control and has to push the button, right? So maybe that the humans would be, so there's an issue of accountability here, but they can be put on pretty much anything like submarines, tanks, anything used for like navigation, targeting. They're also used in planning stages, right? The non-lethal or the semi-autonomous used for planning operations. And so if you think about it, if the algorithm, if we said, hey, here's the situation, what do we do about it? The algorithm, does its thing and comes up with a plan of operation. If we commit to following whatever the algorithm said that we should do, well, algorithms don't have empathy and ethics, right? So the algorithm could tell us to do something pretty horrendous, right? Like using utilitarian ethics here, greatest good for the greatest number of people, could be, the logical default, and really bad things could happen, right? Other affirmatives will say, no, lethal autonomous weapon systems are inevitable. We should cooperate with one another and develop them, right? Because our adversaries like Russia and China are developing them now. There's some evidence that says that Russia has used them in against Ukraine, but that is totally unsubstantiated so far. Right, so we need to cooperate, and NATO members need to have our own quote unquote laws, our killer robot systems, in order to, not only fight if need be against, our adversaries, but to deter them as well. Right. So what we want to do though is make sure that that development is uniform and safe. That there isn't some like rogue element of it, so that if we agree that we should only have semi-autonomous, artificial intelligence weapon systems, right? And then France decides, no way, we want fully autonomous. It can't, it can't go rogue, right? So there is that cooperation to make sure that all member states are on the same page and develop these laws safely through cooperation. So the advantages here would be, preventing, a wider war in the Ukraine, other Russia-based wars, China taking Taiwan is a scenario that will pop up quite a bit this semester as well. There are also several member states within NATO that really do not like laws. They and autonomous weapon systems of varying degrees, right? So, but especially the lethal autonomous weapon systems. I'm pretty sure it's France being the one that is kind of like a ringleader of no, right? We should be working toward a treaty to ban laws, right? And if NATO does it, the argument would, the modeling argument theoretically would kick in, and other countries would follow along, right? Or we would probably like pressure them somehow to follow along. And the novice case, the cooperate to establish ethical guidelines. When I saw this in the Michigan file, I said, cool, I'll just recut all of this and or most of this and use it for our camp. Well, then I found out that the novice packet was exactly the Michigan case, and didn't even change the font, honestly. So I was like, well, did I just waste all my time? No, actually, because what I recut were all the solvency articles. So I'm pretty on top of what the different solvency authors, or what the different ideas for solvency actually are for ethical AI standards. Right. And so one aspect of this is that we need to have ethical AI standards so that the inevitable use, like Turkey's developing them right now, other members in NATO will probably be developing them. So we need to have ethical standards. And what they mean by ethical standards, that ethical being democracy, democratic principles of accountability and responsibility, right? Transparency. So, i.e., humans have to be involved, right? So the ethical standards case is another one that says that laws can be good, right? But only if we follow ethical principles. And that's where that human dignity advantage in that file comes from. The problem with this affirmative, in my opinion, is the word ethical. Right? Other than like lots of solvency issues and potential disagreements within NATO on this particular issue, for me, the ethics part of it means that you link to a lot of different criticisms. Even the most basic, I got this from the LD squad criticisms of ethics, right? Because it begs the question of what type of ethics, what scheme, are they utilitarian ethics to where certain populations could be sacrificed for the greater good, right? Going to the end route of that. Or are they more are these ethical standards more deontological in nature, where they focus on things as goods in and of themselves, regardless of their utility? And that makes a big difference in terms of what the negatives, criticisms of ethics are actually talking about. Because I can definitely see high school debaters, one side says ethics and the other side, well, ethics bad, and they'll actually be talking about two very different things, both within the field of ethics and morality. But if you have Lincoln Douglas debaters on your squad, or a debater, if you have back files from Lincoln Douglas debaters, get some ethics cards and utilitarianism deontology cards. They can actually work on case as well as helpers for critique arguments too. The other reason why I don't like the whole ethics part of it is because you have to put the word ethics or ethical in the plan text. And that makes it very easy to substitute the word safety or ethics, safety standards. And there's literature that talks about human control being the only safe measure, right? So it would literally solve 100% of the affirmative, and would probably be a little bit less dicey, given that there are already broad differences in ethical, positions on this issue within NATO right now. So just a few other cases that I've come across, lots of different cooperative development type of affirmatives that claim deterrence and like Russia and China war advantages. The ban laws, I've seen it in terms of a treaty and just that we should cooperate with NATO and to develop a ban on laws. Artificial intelligence submarines. And we use some of this for guidance or for guidance and navigation potentially now, but it is not as widespread as it's one of those things that's going in that direction. And it's great if we had artificial intelligence to really get us to understand exactly where we are in the ocean and how far we are from the ocean floor, et cetera. If that makes a huge difference, then that's great. But if it's the one in a nuclear submarine and the AI says, oh, look, target, there's the enemy, and decides it's a good idea to launch their SLBMs, then we have a nuclear war, right? And it just is a matter of how, if we're going to have this artificial intelligence on things like tanks and submarines and all this other stuff, it makes a difference in terms of like what are the restrictions that we put on it and what are the kind of guiding or framing ideas that we have in our minds when we approach this this idea of autonomous weapon systems, right? Do we have the idea of utilitarianism, that type of perspective that says like, look, this is great, we can go, we can deter Russia and China? Or is it something maybe a different area of ethics that no, that's just a good idea in and of itself? Kind of difficult. So cooperative development, ban laws, AI, submarines, tank guidance systems, precision guided munitions. PGMs are ones that definitely will come up with some affirmatives. The big advantage of them will be battlefield accuracy, probably terrorism. It's easier for us to target and hit the terrorists, and things along that nature. So that is when we launch a missile somewhere or any type of exploding ordnance, that we have accurate and very detailed and adaptive, guidance systems. So for example, if there's a sudden gust of wind, that blows the drone up, a mile or whatever, the artificial intelligence would correct for that, right? As soon as it found the actual difference in wind speed, it would make a correction. So we need adaptive measures that can be found within artificial intelligence that would take some delay for a human to actually do, right? The AI would find it first and then solve the problem first. Oh, the other ones that I talked about were that I've come across definitely intellectual property rights, about the different types of emerging disruptive technologies. This is especially true in the ones that are just developing, and is also true in all three areas of the topic, right? The IP, the intellectual property rights is an issue in all three of those. All right, anything else we want to talk about artificial intelligence? I mean, this is something that someone who's like an expert in this field could probably talk about forever, but this is what I know. And I don't like to talk about things that I do not know. All right, let's go on to the next area.